You are listening to Middle East Monitor Conversations, bringing you lively discussions with prominent voices from the region and beyond, as we delve deeper into issues shaping the Middle East and North Africa, from politics, the culture, and the arts.
Hello and welcome to another conversation with the Middle East Monitor. My name is Nasim Ahmed and I will be your host for today's discussion. We are in conversation today with a professor in Genocide Studies and its Prevention, Dr. Gregory Stanton. We will be asking him about some of the major flashpoints in the world today from India, Ukraine, Israel, China, and getting his thoughts on what he fears are the flashpoints that could lead to genocide. Dr. Stanton is the founding president and chairman of Genocide Watch. From 2010 and 2019, he was a research professor in Genocide Studies and Prevention at the School of Conflict Analysis and Resolution at George Mason University, Virginia, USA. Before that, he was the James Farmer Professor in Human Rights at the University of Mary Washington. Welcome to the conversation, Dr. Stanton.
It's a great honor to be with you today.
Thank you for giving us your time. I think if you can begin just by discussing the theory, the founding of your organization, the work of Genocide Watch. It's been around for a number of years. What is it that you do? And tell us a bit about the history of the organization. I think it'd be a good point for us to start our conversation.
Sure. I founded Genocide Watch in 1999 after I resigned from the State Department after the US voted against the International Criminal Court. Prior to that, I'd been in the State Department and was the person who wrote the UN resolutions that created the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, and also the resolutions that created the Cambodian Tribunal. I had actually started the work against genocide back in 1980 when I founded the Cambodian Genocide Project, which the intent of which was to bring the Khmer Rouge to justice. People said it was impossible, but as you know, we eventually did it. The reason that Genocide Watch was started was I realized that we couldn't trust governments to stop genocide. In fact, governments were usually the entities that committed genocide. And so we needed a world mass movement against genocide. And so I founded Genocide Watch to create such a movement, and at the same time created the Alliance Against Genocide, which now has over 100 member organizations in 31 countries. Some of them much larger than Genocide Watch, the International Crisis Group, Minority Rights Group, many other groups. The reason why Genocide Watch, I thought, and still think, is needed is because we try to educate people about genocide, what the causes are, what the stages are, the processes that lead to genocide. And then we also try to do early warning of situations where we see genocide coming. And we've been pretty good at that, actually. The first real, I'd say, early warning that we did was when I predicted this is even before Genocide Watch, but I predicted the Rwandan genocide 5 years before it happened and took it to the president of Rwanda and predicted it, told him. And it turned out to be, right on. But since then, there have been many other instances where we have, in fact, predicted genocide.
I think we want to get to the successful predictions later on. But what I found fascinating looking at your work and the models you've produced is how effective and reliable those models are. And you've produced a 10-stage model in predicting genocide. I think for our listeners, if you can just summarize the 10 stages of of genocide and how we get to genocide, because it's not something just happens overnight. It's something that happens gradually over time, over years, maybe even decades. And we see some of that now, which we will, of course, talk about. So just give us a quick summary of the stages and the slow escalation to genocide.
The 10 stages of genocide model is one that I developed after really comparing a lot of genocides, the Holocaust, the Armenian genocide, the Rwandan genocide, others. But I developed it especially around the Cambodian genocide, which I'd begun work on in 1980, and first formulated it and gave a lecture about it in 1987. But it was when I was in the State Department and Madeleine Albright asked me to go around and talk to people involved in, as she put it, our mistakes in Rwanda, that I realized how even our diplomats didn't understand the meaning of genocide and didn't know about the processes that lead to it. So this 10 stages of genocide, I should really, I think, call them processes of genocide, because it's not a linear model. You don't just first have one, then two, then so forth and so on. But there is a logic to the development of genocide. And that's why it's called the 10 stages of genocide. The basic model is of the processes that lead to genocide. If you want to envision it as a model, you might think of those Russian Matryoshka dolls, where one little doll is inside another, is inside another, is inside another. They're nesting dolls. And that's the way these so-called stages or processes are interrelated. Another way to think of it is sort of like the way, nuclear rods are pushed further and further, deeper, deeper into a nuclear reactor. And each of these rods contributes to the overall eventual nuclear reaction. So what we've got here is a series of processes, 10 processes that we've identified. We're not saying they're the only ones, but we've seen them in every genocide that we have studied. The first is classification. You have to have an us versus them. It's where the people classify the world into Jews and Germans and Tutsis and Hutus and you name it, all the ethnic groups and so forth in the world. The second is symbolization, where we name those classifications, or we even put symbols on them. The Nazi yellow star, for instance, was such a symbol. We have ways to symbolize our classifications. The third stage is discrimination, in which the targeted group is basically discriminated against by law, by culture, in which there'll be whole groups of people that have no human rights, for instance, slaves, people in lots of countries where they literally can't vote. We have then the stage of dehumanization, in which the targeted group is actually dehumanized, in which they're called things like cockroaches or vermin or a cancer in the society or a disease or robbers or rapists, the way President Trump identified for people coming across our southern border, for instance. This dehumanization means that when people who are intending to commit genocide do so, they don't think the people they're killing are human. It takes away this revulsion against murder that is, in fact, universal among human beings. And if you classify these people and dehumanize them outside of the universe of moral concern, then, of course, it makes it much easier to kill them. The next stage is organization, in which you actually organize hate groups to, do the genocide, or to do all the other discrimination and other forms of crimes against humanity. That group, in turn, polarizes the society. The idea here is to drive out the moderates. The people in the organized hate group say, if you're not with us, you're against us. It is what is characteristic of polarized societies. The US is one right now, for instance. We have another one in India, in which the Modi government is attempting to polarize India and to dehumanize Muslims and so forth. you then have preparation, literal preparation, planning for genocide. We saw that in the Wannsee conference that the Nazis had. We saw it in the meetings of the Akazu group in Rwanda when they were planning that genocide. Genocides are planned. The reason they have to be planned is genocide is not an individual crime, it's a group crime. So you have to have a group that plans the killing and the other forms of genocide. Let me, by the way, say here, genocide isn't just killing. It includes also creating conditions of life that are intended to destroy the group, starving them, for instance, destroying their cities. We see it going on right now in Ukraine. We also have intentional harming of the mental and physical health of people, intending to destroy the group. We see that also, by the way, right now in Ukraine. It happened in Sudan, of course, where they literally starve people. It was true in Myanmar also. We see, in other words, that kind of action that can, in fact, lead up to the actual destruction of the group. So then after this plan, then you have persecution and the early stages of actual genocidal acts. And that can include sending people to concentration camps. It can include driving them out of their homes. It can include creating ghettos. It might, really mean serious, what people might like to call ethnic cleansing. I hate that word because it was invented by Milosevic. Forced displacement of a group. And then finally you get the actual extermination. What lawyers then are willing to call genocide. It includes these acts, the killing, the creating conditions of life to destroy, the serious mental and bodily harm, and taking away the children of the group. That's what Americans did to Native Americans, put them in schools where they couldn't speak their languages and so forth. That is actual genocide. And also preventing births within the group, forced sterilization, things of that sort. That is actual genocide. The genocide is always also accompanied by and followed by denial, the final stage, the 10th stage, in which the people who do it deny they ever did it. They break up the bodies, they bury them in mass graves, they even move them around from one mass grave to another, the way the Serbs did in Bosnia. So you can't identify the victims. That kind of denial is still being carried out by Turkey, for instance, about the Armenian genocide. And it always accompanies every genocide right from the start. So those are the basic stages. The reason why the model has worked and is so powerful is, first of all, it can be understood by people. It is, in many ways, something, oh, yes, I've seen that. And also it is predictive in that you don't have to get to the final stages in order to see the early stages and to be very shocked by them. So when you see Trump calling all these people coming across the southern border robbers and rapists, you say, wait a minute, that's dehumanization. And you scream bloody murder about it. That is why it is a very predictive model. It's why we have, as I say, usually are the first group to predict genocide.
You mentioned how effective it's been over the years, and you did mention the number of genocides that were predicted successfully, whether it be in Latin America and of course Rwanda, Bosnia is another one. I wanted to ask a question, because you mentioned you were in the State Department. I think you were working with Madeleine Albright. What was the reason for the US inaction? I mean, you predicted the Rwanda genocide perfectly, and it went through the various stages. And I think Clinton mentioned it was probably the worst decision of his life, and he feels shamed by it. But this is separate to what I was going to ask you initially. But what was the reason for Clinton administration not acting before the actual genocide was carried out against the Houthis?
Well, the default position of most governments when confronted with the evidence, the predictions, is do nothing, because they don't want to do something and then find out, that it really wasn't going to happen. So they say, oh gosh, the benefit of the doubt should be given to non-action. Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's the opposite, the other way around. If you have really strong proof that a genocide is going to happen, it's a lot like knowing that epidemic or pandemic is on its way. When you have all the birds in Hong Kong dying of bird flu or something, you got to take action right away. And so, in fact, they did. They killed all the chickens. I remember that. And it stopped it. Well, that's the way genocide should be handled, and not, obviously killing chickens. But the point is, you've got to tell the people planning that genocide, we won't let it happen. And in this case, in Rwanda, we could have done that. This is something I knew because I was in the State Department and had top secret clearance. We had over 10,000 US Marines on ships just off the coast of East Africa when that genocide started. And with helicopters that could have gotten them into Rwanda within, a few days, at the most a week. We also had plenty of early warnings. General Dallaire had gotten word from inside the group that was planning the genocide that over 500,000 machetes had just arrived from China, and they were being distributed to the Interahamwe, the hate groups that were going to carry out the killings in Rwanda. And this was in January of 1994. This is months before it started. He knew it. He asked actually Kofi Annan and Iqbal Riza in the UN for permission to go and confiscate those weapons as well as the rifles and everything. And they turned him down. They said, that's beyond your mandate. It wasn't beyond his mandate. He was sent in there to be a peacekeeper. So what we had here was, again, the default position of non-action. The US State Department didn't want to act because we had just been through Somalia and we had lost 18, US Marines in the Black Hawk Down incident. And Clinton was very embarrassed by that. And he had advisors in the National Security Council, Clark, for instance, Susan Rice, others, who said, oh, we don't want to get involved in another civil war in Africa. And so they said, no, we don't want to get involved in that in Rwanda, even though they knew it was coming. And so when he says we didn't know it was coming, he's just not telling the truth. The other thing, too, is a reluctance to commit your own armed forces to intervene in a situation in which you may lose some of those people. Having the mothers and the families of these people back here in the United States saying, what on earth were we doing getting involved in that situation? So actually, since we've understood a lot more about genocide, our basic reaction has usually been bombing. It has not been sending in our troops. That's what we did, for instance, in Kosovo. It's what we did finally around the Bosnian genocide. We didn't lose a single person in those interventions. That, in other words, is the reason why governments don't take action. They don't want to risk their own people, and they also do not see it as in their vital national interest. Now, I do think it's in our national interest. In fact, using the word vital in its fullest sense about life, I think it is a vital interest to us to intervene in those situations. But it doesn't mean you have to do it by sending in the US Marines. In fact, the best way is to try to head it off before it ever happens. We, for instance, knew that another genocide could occur in Burundi because it has the same ethnic makeup as Rwanda. And when Nkurunziza said he was going to go for a third term against the Constitution of Burundi, and there were huge demonstrations, and there were all kinds of other indicators, signs, early warning signs that genocide could occur in Burundi.
So
action was taken diplomatically to warn Nkurunziza that if a genocide broke out in Burundi, the countries around Burundi, and they got together on this, told him, if you start a genocide in Burundi, we are going to send in troops and we're going to stop it. And especially, of course, that meant a lot coming from Paul Kagame in Rwanda, right next door with a powerful army.
Yeah, I was going to ask, I just want to stay on this point a little bit during the Clinton administration and just unpack your model a bit more. Because at that time, of course, the reason, as you explained, for the Rwanda genocide was partly US inaction, but there's also examples of US action which has led to atrocities. And I'm wondering whether when you look at US foreign policy in the 90s, just to take an example, in that decade, is there a sense of self-reflection in US foreign policy? Like, for example, there was a famous interview where Albright was asked, about the sanctions on Iraq, for example, under Saddam Hussein. And when she was asked whether sanctions was actually worth it, given that some 500,000 children had died. So for some looking outside, they'll say, look, the US isn't capable of recognizing, situations where it's actually fueling aspects of genocide, let's just say, if not complete genocide. So you were there at the time. So when you look back now, do you see an administration that's in tension, in conflict, in contradiction within itself? How do you look back at that period when there were sanctions in Iraq? So this is an example of US doing something which is causing so much harm and grief, which some would say is actually an act of genocide.
Well, I told Madeleine Albright it was a statement she would never live down. I told her that she was wrong, that collateral damage can never be children. I just confronted her about it. But I was interested in the fact that she asked me to go around and talk to the people involved in our Rwandan policy to ask them why they thought we had made the mistakes we did. And I did. I went around, and when I went to the Rwandan desk officer, Kevin Aston, he said, Greg, if you keep going around calling these mistakes, you're going to have a short career here in the State Department. Well, that was a prophetic statement, by the way, because within a year, my supervisor had recommended that I be terminated in the Foreign Service for, speaking out on Rwanda and so forth. But anyway, the statement she made was typical of what I would call the so realpolitik view of foreign policy, in which you see the national interest in such a narrow way that you don't even understand that deaths of children can't possibly be in the national interest of any country, including the United States. And it's been worse than that. We supported the genocide in Guatemala. We supported the genocide in Indonesia. We've supported other genocides. Our country has a very bad history on that issue, on genocides. And the reason is, for a lot of these realpolitik people, they think national interest means oil and power, and basically where you are in the balance of power in the world. Well, I do not think that should be the national interest of the United States. I think the national interest of the United States and of all countries that adhere to human rights should be the human rights of the people in the countries that are affected. In other words, we should be on the side of the people all around the world. And that means applying the same standards of human rights we'd want to apply to ourselves. And if we have regimes that are carrying out genocide against their own people, we should be trying to overthrow them. Not perhaps, we don't send in Marines or anything like this, but we should be supporting oppositions in those governments, in those situations. That's the policy we took, by the way, in Ukraine. I was legal advisor to the Ukrainian independence movement back in 1988 through 92, before I joined the State Department. And we were there supporting a popular movement for independence of Ukraine, to break free of the Soviet Union. And for me, that's a real understanding of what national interest should mean. I hope that we will return to that kind of policy in around the world, really. And I hope that, in other words, I see it differently than this group.
Quickly, if I want to turn to current day, you look at the world now, so many flashpoints, so many conflicts at the moment. Which one worries you the most in terms of, leading to a genocide? Many have said India is a prime example of where we are very close to a situation of genocide. Is that really at the top of your list, or are there other conflicts which you look at and think, oh, this could lead,
Well, of course, at the top of our list are the places where genocide is already occurring, actively occurring. I don't think it is yet in India, but in Ukraine right now, it's an active genocide. Russia is committing genocide in Ukraine. We believe that this intentional destruction in entire cities, and as what the Russians are doing, is an act of genocide. It is, after all, the intentional destruction of a significant part of a national group. When you're trying to wipe out, these cities, Mariupol and some of these other cities, you're trying to destroy part of a group, part of a national group. So for me, that's by definition genocide. And there are many other circumstances too, where we think genocide is ongoing. Yemen is one. We think there is, and that is being done by both sides in Yemen, by the Houthis and by the Saudis. We also see it by, situations like in Sudan, where the genocide against Darfuris and so forth is continuing. The military is still in charge in Sudan, even though there was a sort of a revolution, but it didn't change really the government. South Sudan, another place where there's an active genocide, and it's a two-way genocide, Dinkas versus Nuer, basically. And in the Eastern Congo, where you have the same kinds of tensions, anti-Tutsi tensions, that are causing a lot of deaths, whole hundreds of thousands of people in refugee camps and IDP camps. So those are the active ones. But in terms of potential for genocide, I would say India is at the top of the list, because it is a country, it is so big, it has so many people, and you have a government actively promoting the forces, these processes that we consider processes that lead to genocide. You have the Modi government, which already showed its genocidal tendencies when Modi was chief minister of Gujarat in 2002. And over 1,000 Muslims were massacred in Gujarat in they call them communal riots, but they were genocidal massacres. And Modi never spoke out against them. In fact, there's evidence that he instructed his police not to intervene. So, that's called complicity. It's also called aiding and abetting. So I think he was actually guilty of genocide in that case. And I think he and his Home Minister Shah and others in India are continuing to promote the Hindutva movement, which wants to create a Hindu Rashtra, in other words, a Hindu nation, that would exclude whole groups of people, but especially Muslims. Now, you've got a population in India with over 200 million Muslims. A lot of people have no idea that there are over 200 million Muslims in India. There are more Muslims in India, in fact, than in Pakistan. And how can you exclude such a huge portion of your population from full rights in India? And that is what they're trying to do. So I really am very worried about India right now. We also, we see also huge dangers in Afghanistan against the Hazara, particularly the Shia Hazara, that is being carried out now by the Taliban and by a splinter group from ISIS that's blowing up mosques and schools and other things, and especially is targeting the Hazaras. So there are a number of countries where we do believe genocide is imminent.
I mean, and we're running out of time, so I want to quickly ask you this last question. I mean, what major lessons have you learned from your studies of genocide in how to stop an impending genocide? I mean, I'm asking in particular to relations with the Gulf countries, for example, with India. There seems to be another case of denial here. They still have really strong economic relations with the Modi government, and they made strong denunciations of the cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but they've never really come out and said anything really strong with regards to the real human rights violations that's taking place against the Muslims. And the Gulf countries are in a very strong position. They have a lot of leverage against Modi to do something about it. So in terms of inaction, in the same as with the US in the case of Rwanda, is there a fear in your mind that this kind of inaction, lack of condemnation, could lead to another genocide? And with that answer, I think we will kind of wrap up.
The answer is yes. I think that that kind of inaction does lead to genocide. We've seen it before. The inaction in the United States against Hitler was a good example of how inaction eventually leads to genocide. I'm not saying Modi is Hitler at all, but what I'm saying is by trying to play it cool, not do anything, just be inactive, the US is actually feeding a government and a whole situation that will lead to genocide. What we have is we need to take a strong position with Mr. Modi and say, look, if you have a genocide in your country, it's going to change everything. We know we are natural allies, we're democracies, and we're, after all, both trying to fend off the extremely growing power of China. But don't mean that gives you a free pass to do these really bad things against your own people. We need to tell him, look, our trade relations with you will be destroyed if you start having a genocide against Muslims. We will, just exclude you, just the way we've done with Russia. And believe me, it will be that serious. And with the Gulf states, we've got to say to them, look, we need your oil, all that, oh yeah. But they're dependent on us too. We do their banking. We do all kinds of the other things that make it possible for them to even exist. So we need to tell those monarchies, they're mostly monarchies, you know what? We're a republic. We don't believe in monarchies. We think that, it's okay if you want to treat your citizens well and give them human rights and stuff. But when you violate their human rights, we will oppose you. And so I think we need to have a much stronger policy, a much stronger foreign policy. I believe in diplomacy. I believe.
Do you think the US could do that, though? Do you think the US could do that? Is there any position at the moment? Okay.
I mean, it's all a matter of political will. I don't know if the US will do it, because that's where the real politic people still have control of our US foreign policy. That's the people who, believe it's all about oil and power. Unfortunately, I don't think they have prevailed in the Biden administration. I hope that they would, but I don't think they have. And so I don't think things are going to change unless we have much more progressive leadership here in the United States.
Dr. Stanton, we have come to the end of our time, and I've really enjoyed our conversation. And hopefully we can have another one soon. I want to thank our viewers who have tuned in to watch as well. You can watch the video, the recording on MEMO website, Facebook, and also YouTube if you choose to do so. So from me, Naseem Ahmed, thank you very much, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
This was Middle East Monitor Conversations, brought to you by the Middle East Monitor in London.